This is Share the Vision, presented by the Resource Center, a discussion of the programs and services of the Resource Center and about issues related to individuals with disabilities. The theme for this year's Resource Center Symposium was the making of a resilient community. The keynote speaker was Stephen Manning. He's a prominent attorney in Oregon working in the area of immigration. Stephen Manning grew up in this area and is the brother of Michelle Albaugh, the Director of Learning and Development at the Resource Center. Today, from a little earlier this spring, Stephen Manning's keynote address at the TRC Symposium, Relentlessly Resilient, Building Power and Winning Even When Everything Suggests You Will Fail.
I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a lawyer in private practice in Portland, where I also work as the Executive Director of the Innovation Law Lab. At the Law Lab, we use technology and litigation and data science to build these legal architectures, we call them. So these legal structures that defend democracy, fairness, and justice, aimed at places where it's most in need, at this points in our system where it's really vulnerable. And right now, we are focusing our system, our legal architecture for refugees and immigrants. So we're defending right now, the caravan. You may have heard of the refugee caravan that's been in the news. So we're defending members of the refugee caravan right now. We've designed and we support two of the nation's largest pro bono projects defending immigrants and refugees in detention centers in very remote, hostile locations. So women, children, men. We've designed and we support this universal representation program to be able to bring justice to everybody, to universally. In Oregon, that's going to launch in September. It's the first of its kind in this nation. It's been a really wild and intense time. And I want to thank you for being here, right? Because you all are very brilliant people. The work you're doing is absolutely critical, and I know you know that, but I want you to know that other people know that too. So the work you do about creating these complex and interdependent systems to improve the human condition, right? To care about other people, to care about yourselves, to care about someone else. That's the core of what it means to be civil in a civil society, right? This concept of who we are as a people, as a nation, as a state, as a region, as a county, the work you do and the things you believe in, that defines us as a nation and as a civic community. And so to be here with you in this room on this lovely day, in this lovely space, to share my experience about resilience, this relentless resilience, is a great honor. So thank you. Thank you for coming, for inviting me. I live in Oregon, but I am actually a native of northwestern Pennsylvania. And I've actually spent some time here at Chautauqua Lake. So my dad and my mom, they had this modest fishing cottage along Goose Creek for many years. And I grew up here. So cold, right? I was just talking with my friend Chris. Cold winters. You know this, right? Bone-chilling cold winters with lots of snow and lots of ice. And when I was growing up, I did not like winter because it was cold and dark and icy. So it's surprising to me that, because I hated winter, that I spend a lot of time and money flying around the world seeking out icy conditions. Now, I practice, I train for this, I spend a lot of money doing this, and it's totally crazy because I use these ice axes and I put these big steel, crampons, like these steel teeth on the bottom of my shoes, and I climb ice. And I take these ice axes and these ice screws, and I attach the ice screws to the ice so that I'm attached to the ice, so that when I'm climbing, I don't die. Those are three, right? So there's three rules to climbing. Don't fall, and don't hit the ground. And the ice screws there are in case you break the first two rules, and so you don't hit the ground. So I'm in Colorado, and I'm climbing this frozen waterfall. And there's this great rhythm to it. It's like pick, pick, click, click, pick, pick, click, click. And you just move up the waterfall. And ice climbing is unlike rock climbing, if you've rock climbed, where you use sort of the natural features in the surface of the rock to move. With ice climbing, you're actually making these intrusions into the ice. So I'm actually invading the ice with my pick each time on the assumption that the ice can hold me. And if the pick placement doesn't hold, that's what the ice screw is for. So I throw this pick placement and the dinner plates. And what dinner plating means is that there's this shallow, that the ice looks like a dinner plate. It shatters and it comes out, and then my pick comes out. And then there's this radial cracking that forms, and then it comes and it forms. And then suddenly the entire column of ice that I was attached to, that I was relying on for my own protection, collapsed. And I remember this big wave of glitter, like this super craft store explosion all around me. And then I remember just being in the snow on my back, on the snow ledge. I was still clipped in, so the top part of the ice column had collapsed, but the bottom part hadn't, right? So the top part where I had been attached was gone, but I'm still attached here at the bottom. And so the top screws were useless, the bottom ones weren't. And I didn't know this until after the fact, but I'm laying there, and I'm thinking, right, as we all do, like in these sort of unexpected situations, like, how did I get here, right? And I started thinking how I needed to get myself off this ledge. And I was wondering if this ledge was actually safe, and this, like, is this ice also going to shatter? So frozen water, ice, has a lot of these interesting structural properties, like how it holds tension and compression forces, and how it battles shear forces. And it's elastic. You might not think of ice as being elastic, but it has elasticity. And it's also bendable. There's all kinds of terms that climbers use to describe ice: verglass, goose, sinker, cauliflower. But one always wants to be climbing on what we call the hockey rink ice, the vertical hockey rink, because that's ice that has elasticity. Hockey rink ice is not brittle. It can withstand intrusions, and it self-heals. And it's just as strong after the intrusion as before, and it can withstand multiple intrusions and still maintain its strength. But something had happened while I was climbing. What I thought was hockey rink ice wasn't. Something made the ice shatter. Why didn't it heal? And why was I laying on this ledge? Right? Hold that thought. So, I've lived in Oregon now for most of my life, and I've spent a lot of time now traveling around the world. My first memory of a border is actually the Pennsylvania-New York border. There's no wall there. It's just a dirt road in my memory, right? And my granddad has this place in Bradford, Pennsylvania, that's where I was born, that sneaks right up onto the New York border. And when I was just this little thing, and my brother was an even littler thing, we were at my granddad's place, and we went out onto the road, and we're on the paved road, and that turns into the gravel road, that turns into the dirt road, that snakes into the woods. And we walk, and we come up to this sign, and it says, "Welcome to the Empire State." And I turn to my little brother, and I say, "This is where Darth Vader lives." And I don't know if he believed me or not, but I believed me. And so I do immigrant defense work and immigrant rights work, refugees, asylees, people who are putting their families together for the first time and are separated by borders, or people who have their families together, but the government seeks to separate them because of where they're from. That's what I do. And that brings me to borders all around the world, not just the PA-New York border. So lately I've been spending a lot of time at the U.S.-Mexican border, borders outside the European Union, borders between what's lawful and unlawful, between what's a rule of law system and not a rule of law system, between what's constitutional and unconstitutional. And I've been in court a lot. And I was in court the other day, and my client, Wilson, who is just generally a very nice man. He's from Guatemala, and the government's trying to deport him. Some bad things happened to him, and we're seeking asylum. And he says to me, after a very depressing hearing, he says, "Stephen, you're the best attorney ever," which is totally delusional, right? Because everything I've done for Wilson has been denied. Every application we filed, we've lost. But he says to me, "You're the best attorney ever." And I say, "Wilson, you're delusional. Why are you saying this?" He's like, "Yeah, I know we're losing. But you are in this fight with me. And you are with me on this journey. Before you, everyone said no, but you said yes. And that lets me have hope." And so for a moment, I'm glowing this. I'm thinking, well, maybe I really am the best lawyer ever, right? But no, I'm a fine lawyer, but I'm not the best lawyer ever. What Wilson was doing, this man who absolutely epitomized the walking definition of resilience. So he has this fearless realism that he really recognizes reality. He has this deep meaning in his life, and he can improvise in a situation. We'd actually flipped roles. My client was now supporting me, giving me meaning so that I could bounce back from this hearing, so that I could see that the work I was doing was meaningful, because it was meaningful for him. And so when I think about Wilson and his resilience, he's not unlike so many other people that I know. and that I've had the good fortune to represent and work with. And this got me to thinking about more of my clients. Humans who have fled terror, violence, war, poverty, persecution. Humans who have experienced really bad things. These events that forcefully intrude into their lives. Events like sexual assault, domestic violence, house bombings, killings. That to me would just shatter me. Or there's even more mundane things that have happened. The unexpected death of the primary wage earner. Or a family member who succumbs to addiction and disappears to the streets. Right? That in certain places, to me, that would just set me back, and that would be an intractable setback. And sometimes people never recover. There never seems to be a discernible pathway back to baseline. Sometimes people find themselves in that same cycle of violence, right, or addiction. But then there's others, like Wilson, who don't shatter. In fact, he's thriving. He's prospering. He's helping me become resilient. So what was it about him? What was it about Wilson and people like him that allowed them to thrive in spite of adversity? That things that would have easily flattened me, resiliency, bouncing back, being able to recover from those setbacks. Now, I have no doubt that you know people exactly like Wilson in your personal lives and your work lives, people who suffer hardship and bounce back quickly. And many of you are those people. And so what I want to know, is it something inherent in you? Is it like something like being a talented singer or being a fast runner? Is it some inexplicable part of your DNA, or is it just luck? That's what I want to know. What is it that you do that Wilson does that I can mirror? Can I become like you? Can I become resilient? Can I learn to bounce back? And so I'd like to use my time with you this morning to explain why I think the answer is yes. That I think I can learn the traits. And I think if I can learn, anybody can learn the traits of resiliency. That we can learn the traits of resiliency from people like Wilson and others who have successfully adapted to negative change. How they rebound. We can look at how they rebound and thrived in the face of adversity. Now, there's a lot of good research going on about resiliency theory. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a lawyer. Right? So I'm not going to talk to you about psychological theory. But I'm going to tell you about my experience. You all are the experts on the psychological theory. I'd like to share my experience, put it through a framework of some resilience theory. Particularly, I'm going to draw on the work of two researchers from Harvard, Diane Coutu and Amy Edmondson, to help frame and discuss the things that I've learned from my clients. So first, I'd like to share these experiences with these several individuals who I work with to help illustrate these three common traits of resilient people. A staunch acceptance of reality, a deep belief that life is meaningful, and an uncanny ability to improvise. And then I'd like to provide three tools that I've used, that Wilson used, to create space to allow people to find their own resiliency. So you're ready? Okay. So I want to start with this story, and it's the story of Maria. So that's really not her name. And she's from Mexico. And that's where she grew up, and she's 19 or 20. She's getting married literally the next day, and her dad has a lot of alcoholism problems. There's some domestic violence in the family, some stuff going on. Dad has some alcoholism, and he just goes out the night before the wedding, and he doesn't come back. And he never comes back. He just leaves, and he doesn't show up at the wedding. She never sees him again. She's talked to him on the phone, but he's gone. After the wedding, so just a couple weeks after the wedding, her nephew is murdered by a local gangster, and that gangster threatens to murder Maria's son too. Now, Maria's got a house, she's got a husband with a job, she's got family, she's got her church, her friends, she's got a community, right? She's got all that shared experience, past experience, that comes from being from a place. And she leaves it all of it, practically overnight. She comes to the United States, the stranger in a foreign land. These pretty big blows, right? In really quick succession. Within a year after her arrival in the United States, she opens up her first microenterprise, a restaurant. And now, just about 10 years in the United States, she is now the founder and owner of one of the highest grossing restaurant chains in the Pacific Northwest. And so when I talk to her about this, and she tells me her story, she is like a totally nice person, right? And she will admit she's not a genius. She doesn't have a high school education. She went to 6th grade. She certainly has her sense of optimism, but she's not perky and idealistic. She is very grounded. She would be a very typical person that you know, that we all know, but for the fact that she has absolute acceptance of her own reality, this fearless realism, this unflinching, sober acknowledgement of the real-time situation, all of her assets, all of her strengths and weaknesses, and all of the things around her. So it's not about idealism or fantasy or hoping. Maria was not afraid to acknowledge the truth about her father, about the threat to her son, about what it really meant to leave her life, and what that would mean coming to a different place. She asked the question, and I asked this question, like, do I understand and accept the reality of my situation? So understand and accept. Right? So Maria could have reacted very differently to these things, these intrusions in her life. Our natural mechanism is denial, right? So denial about her father, denial about her safety in the community situation, denial about the impact of actually severing yourself from that community. Recognizing reality and accepting it can be unpleasant and painful, but it requires a sense of fearlessness. So that ability to truly stare down reality, to prepare oneself to act in ways allowed someone like Maria to endure and survive extraordinary hardships. So this fearless realism, I think, lets us train ourselves ahead of time how to survive before the fact of hardship. So the second core trait of resilient people. So like Wilson and Maria, the second core trait is this deep belief that life is meaningful, that there's this purpose beyond the moment that we are in right now. Right? So my clients, I go to court and I fight for my clients, and I frequently, as part of the story, my client's been hurt, so my client's the victim. My clients frequently resist that characterization, like, no, I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I get that, right? But I'm going to court, and I want to win this case. You're my victim. And they're like, no. And there's a reason why objectively bad stuff has happened to them, but they don't view themselves as a victim. And I wonder why, and so I've been thinking about that. And I think one of the reasons why, like, in order to live through hardship, if we view ourselves as a victim, hardship doesn't carry any lessons for us. That we can all be in a space of grief and negativity and fear and anger, but being able to move beyond that allows us to draw lessons from our hardship, these injustices that befall us. And so Wilson and Maria, they were these deeply religious individuals, and their faith gave them a set of values that offered them ways to interpret and shape the events in their lives. So Gitani, she's this woman from Ethiopia. When I first meet her, it's this sort of magical moment to me. So I meet her, and she's in this flowing garb that's beautiful red, and she pulls out of some pocket this satchel wrapped in cloth, and she opens it up, and there's three things in there. So one, there's this picture of her mother, this sort of sepia-toned photo. There's what I later know is her diploma from high school. And then there are these words in Amharic, this like script on this piece of paper. And she points to all these things. This is even before we've begun speaking, right? And then we start talking, and she starts telling me her story. And when she lived in Ethiopia, she had given up her job, which can be a difficult thing to get as a woman in Ethiopia. She gave up her job to take care of her mother, who had become very ill. And after 2 years of caring for her mother, her mom died. And now, once her mom died, Gitani realized that at some point during her mom's dementia, her mom had actually signed away the title to the house. And so that when she died, Gitani lost the house, and this court battle ensued, and there's no way she could get it back. So no savings, no home, no job, no community. She's this single woman attempting to live on the streets in Addis Ababa, and that wasn't going to work, right? So she petitioned her brother, who was already here in the U.S., to help, and that's when I met her. Gitani's mom was a midwife, and she had inculcated in Gitani these values of compassion, dedication, and service. Compassion, dedication, and service. Those are the three words that were written on Amharic on that piece of paper that she gave to me, that she carried with her from Ethiopia. She wanted to know those and have those with her mother together, and she wanted me to see them. To her, this hardship she'd suffered, she saw, though, that there was a purpose in her life, that she was to live out her mom's vision, and that gave her a framework for bridging her past with a future concept. She could influence her future. And now she's studying to become a nurse. There are these trio of researchers from the Defense Department that have studied members of the U.S. military, a highly stressful occupation indeed. And they've identified this trait that Gattani demonstrated, and they call it mental hardiness. Hardy people remain healthy under immense stress. They have this high sense of life and work commitment, a greater expectation of being able to influence the patterns in their own lives, and they interpret pain and hardship as normal parts of existence. Now, these researchers have also found that we can teach hardiness, that hardiness is not a talent. It's something we can teach and we can learn, because we can learn to construct meaning in our everyday lives. So for Gattani, it was certainly unbelievably sad to lose her mom, to lose her house, to lose everything. But yet she was still able to construct a meaning in her life, to carry on her mom's legacy that took her beyond the present moment. Another story. A story about Farhad. I'd like to tell the story about Farhad to describe the third trait of resilient people. So Farhad was a student by day, and as a break from sort of the hectic life of a university student in Tehran, he was a street photographer at night. So he would roam the streets of Tehran, taking pictures of people in motion, of life, of activity, right? And when the Arab Spring took place in Iran, he turned his street photography skills into building a student political movement. So he was on the street capturing political protests, photographing sit-ins, creating these political manifestos of his art that he would put on the web. He had a blog. He was taking his art and turning it into politics. And that landed him in jail under some pretty horrible conditions. So overcrowding, no sanitation, meager food rations, torture, the stress of not knowing what was going to happen. All these students were crowded into this one jail cell, and the anxiety and stress levels would have soon led to violence, and violence would have just begotten more violence. And so Farhad improvises, right? With stuff that's just sort of littered about in the jail cell, he starts building himself a pinhole camera. So for those of you who don't know what a pinhole camera is, it's just took some cardboard and strung it together, and he started using it to, quote, take pictures in the cell. And then little by little, he would then show others how to make the pinhole camera. And then people began looking and began thinking beyond just their moment, stuff around them, and began improvising. And with this additional improvisation, pretty soon the students returned to being students, and they actually started creating a regularity to their schedule in the jail cell, began teaching. And so certain students within the cohort would have certain days that they would teach others. And so it became this regularity and a mechanism to be able to sustain themselves during this very difficult time. When I asked Farhad about his time in prison, he tells me, everything had been taken from me. I had nothing left. There was nothing left to steal. I had nothing left but only my brain. And so I started imagining what I could do in jail that would be helpful, and so I just started putting the camera together. To him, it just seemed totally natural, right? Researchers call this trait ritualized ingenuity, this practiced ability to make do with whatever is at hand. We might call it tinkering. Some people come by it naturally, but I actually think even those who come by it naturally, we actually train ourselves to do it. So to come by it naturally for Farhad meant that he'd been taking pictures for a while. And so to him, taking pictures was a way of dealing with stress. And so when he was under stress, because when we are under stress, we tend to go to what we're habituated to do. When he was under stress, he's like, oh, why take pictures? And so that's what he began to think of doing. On a more personal example, when I was on the ledge, on the ice, in the snow, I'd actually lost one of my tools. And that's always a bad thing to do. I'd lost one of my tools, and I'm on this ledge, and rappelling was really impractical for where I was at. But if I could get off the ledge, I just needed to get just a little distance, then someone would be able to belay me down. But that was going to be a challenge because I'd lost one of my tools. And so I improvised. I had an ice axe, and I used a carabiner, and it wasn't pretty, but it worked. And in a moment, I was off the ledge, and I was safe. So I improvised in that space. But I really think the training, the climbing, the exercise, I'd been actually practicing to do exactly that thing. So when I say that it was improvised, really what happened is that all the training, all the practice that I'd done before allowed my mind to focus on what do I got at hand? What can I do now? What are the possibilities that I can see now that where others may have been confounded? These traits, they make sense, right? This is resiliency. Unflinching view of reality. Giving meaning to life, having a deep feeling of meaning in life, and being able to have this uncanny sense of improvisation, this ritualized ingenuity. That all makes sense, right? And when we look at people like Wilson, Gaetani, and Maria, and Farhad, and you look at what you do, it's like, for sure. Sometimes, though, and we know this, a natural tendency is towards denial. And in our natural tendency towards denial, we know that we can actually shut down these natural traits of resiliency. So Amy Edmondson, she's this researcher from Harvard, she explains that we often learn the opposite of resiliency when we're young. And it becomes ingrained in us by adulthood. So think about it. No one wakes up in the morning ready to go to work to look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. No one gets excited to do that. In fact, we want to be viewed the opposite of that. We want to be viewed as being smart, helpful, and useful. But because we don't want to be ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative, we've adopted these anti-resiliency strategies so that people don't think we're ignorant, we don't ask questions. To avoid looking incompetent, we don't admit mistakes. To avoid intrusiveness, we don't offer ideas. And to avoid being seen as negative, we never question the status quo. And Professor Edmondson calls this impression management. During the day, we become very busy at managing our impressions, the impressions that people have of us, so that we don't take that interpersonal risk of learning new traits that could help support ourselves or help support others in gaining resiliency. Now, to gain that space, to create that space for others, what Wilson did for me, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a couple things. There's 3 tricks, right? First, acknowledge fallibility. So when I'm seeing someone else who could need space, I acknowledge my own fallibility, that I may miss something. One of the key core values of the Innovation Law Lab is that no one goes it alone. We're all in it together. We're interconnected. And if I can say, like, look, I'm not sure I'm getting everything here. I may miss something, and I need some help. Can you help me make sense of this? We create a sense of interconnectedness. And then we tie that interconnectedness with a sense of uncertainty. Like, look, I model curiosity. I ask a lot of questions. By asking questions, I create the conversational space and give someone the ability to have voice, to ask questions back or to provide answers. Interconnectedness and uncertainty. And then we take those and we frame them in a space where, like, look, we need to execute, but execution's not the problem. We have a learning thing that we have to engage in. And so by engaging in learning, interconnectedness and uncertainty, through a framework of learning, we're able to take an execution problem, turn it into a learning problem, and actually give someone the opportunity, the space to find their own resilience. So resilient people like Wilson, Maria, Gaetani, Farhad, people like you, absolutely like you, right? You face reality with a staunchness, you make meaning from hardship instead of crying out in despair, and you improvise solutions from thin air, right? Other people don't, right? And so the challenge as we talk today, what can we find in ourselves the ability to mirror these traits, fearless realism, mental hardiness, and ritualized ingenuity to build our own sense of resilience? Thank you.
Today on Share the Vision, immigration attorney Stephen Manning talking at the Resource Center Symposium a little earlier this spring on the subject Relentlessly Resilient. On behalf of the Resource Center, thank you for sharing the vision today.